Hello friends, welcome back to our study of chapter 17. It is a difficult chapter, so it takes time, but gradually we will move forward. I propose we resume our study from where we left it, that is verse 8. So let's read that verse, Revelation 17:8. The beast that you saw was, and is not, and will ascend out of the bottomless pit, and go to perdition. And those who dwell on the earth will marvel. Those names are not written in the book of life, from the foundation of the world, when they see the beast that was, and is not, and yet is. This text gives us an indication about the beast. Until now, we have had a description of the woman sitting on the beast, and we understood that the woman was this world system, this woman who reigned over the kings of the earth, and we saw that she was sitting on the beast. We are told a little more about this beast. We are given a description in time. She was, it is the past. She is not, it is the present. She will ascend out of the bottomless pit, it is the future, eventually to go to perdition. So we will examine these three times, past, present and future, a little more closely. She was. She was proves that she already existed, and therefore she closely resembles the beast of chapter 13, the beast rising up out of the sea. This beast received a deadly wound. We can liken she is not to this deadly wound. However, this loss does not mean that she no longer exists at all. What we can understand is that she is no longer on the forefront. Remember chapter 13? This beast was about to die, but then, in the second part of chapter 13, the second beast exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence. This means that this beast was alive. Similarly, she is here under the woman. She is not at the forefront. This position is held by the woman, but she is in the background, she exists. And therefore, she has a kind of dry period, which means that she is currently on hold. And of course, she does not move. She is in biding her time. We saw in chapter 13, the second beast is the beast that had two horns, the false prophet, which works with the global population to make this population worship the beast, but by itself it seems to be doing nothing. In verse 8, we have another indication which is somewhat more difficult to grasp, but which picks up one thing we saw in chapter 13. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world. Here again, we saw the same thing. Is it a question of predestination? Does this mean that God has set before the foundation of the world the fate of all men? No, this is not the case. God knows in advance what will be the choice of each and every one. He wrote it and sealed it. It is the sealed part of the double document that is the book of life. Therefore, no one knows, not even the angels. And their activities of salvation towards men are the same regardless the fate that God already knows. So no one could be able to accuse him of being biased. Nobody knows except God. However, when after the judgment the seals are opened, then at that time we can see that what God had written in advance is perfectly fulfilled. So no predestination. Predestination which Paul talks about is a predestination to salvation. God has predestined us all for salvation. The inhabitants of the earth will marvel. Let's read it. Revelation 17:8. And those who dwell on the earth will marvel, whose names are not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they see the beast that was and is not and yet is. We have already spoken of this astonishment. All the inhabitants of the earth marvel at the beast's power and its ability to return to the forefront. So I propose we move forward now. Simply, we have noted that these are three phases. It was, this is the beast rising up out of the sea. It is no longer, this is the current phase. It is no longer at the forefront, but it is rising from the bottomless pit. One may wonder what the bottomless pit or the abyss means. Well, I suggest you go and get an idea through a text that we find in the book of Jonah, chapter 2. Here's how Jonah describes his story. Then I said, I have been cast out of your sight, yet I will look again towards your holy temple. The waters surrounded me, even to my soul. The deep closed around me. Weeds were wrapped around my head. I went down to the moorings of the mountains. The earth with its bar closed behind me forever. Yet you have brought up my life from the pit, O Lord my God. When he wrote his story, Jonah showed that he felt lost. He went down into the waters to the moorings of the mountain. He was among weeds in the belly of the great fish, and he believed that his last hour had come. But God raised him from that pit, brought him back from the abyss. So, arising out of the abyss means recovering from an almost dead state, a desperate situation. That's why we can say that this beast arises out of the bottomless pit because its situation was seemingly hopeless, and yet it happens to rise out from it. So it appears in its first phase as the beast arising out of the sea. Then it receives a deadly wound, and at this very moment, she is arising out of the bottomless pit. Now let's continue our study, and I invite you to read the following text, Revelation 17, verse 9. We'll be reading up to verse 11. Here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. There are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other has not yet come, and when he comes, he must continue a short time. The beast that was, and is not, is himself also the 8th, and is of the 7, and is going to perdition. Fortunately, the passage tells us, here is the mind which has wisdom. Because wisdom is indeed required to get the right understanding. There are several possible interpretations, but I'll give you what seems to me the most logical given all the data of the text. So, the 7 heads are 7 mountains. Well, the fact that there are 7 mountains is quite easy to understand. It is the city of 7 hills, that is Rome. These are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. and therefore it is likely that the organization represented by this woman is in Rome. However, the same symbol will have two meanings. We are told there are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other has not yet come, and when he comes, he must continue a short time. The characteristic of these kings is that they succeed one another in time. So those are 5 successive systems of government that we'll try to identify. 1 is, what can be existing at that time? What can exist at the time the vision is given? Not during Jean's time, but at the time the vision is revealed unto him, because the prophet is still in vision. Therefore, at the time of the vision, that is at the time of chapter 17, the system of government that is in place is Babylon. And that is why it seems to me reasonable to consider that this 6th king is none other than Babylon. And then another one is to come. I told you that immediately after the fall of Babylon, the next event will be Christ's return. Well, between the fall of Babylon and Jesus' return, there, for an hour, is a 7th king coming. We shall now try to identify this 7th king. In order to understand these different heads, these different systems of government, we must go back to something that we already saw in chapter 13. Well, in chapter 13 of Revelation, we find here a beast, the beast rising up out of the sea, still the same one. But we saw at that time that it was the synthesis of the 4 animals described in chapter 7 of Prophet Daniel. Allow me to remind you through this chart what we discovered and understood. The 4 beasts of Daniel come up from the sea like the beast: the lion, a bear, a leopard, and a monster. And we saw that the lion had 1 head, the bear 1 head, the leopard 4 heads. This is the empire of Alexander the Great, which was divided among his 4 generals at his death. And then the monster, the Roman Empire, with 1 head. The lion and the bear each having a head, this makes a total of 7 heads. Now, when we look at the horns of all these animals, we consider that the lion has no horn, the bear neither, the leopard neither, but the monster which represents the Roman Empire has 10 horns. Thus, a total of 10. We came to the conclusion that the beast is the synthesis of the 4 animals of the book of Prophet Daniel. Therefore, this beast represents the feudal system of the Middle Age we spoke about. But this is but one of Satan's aspects, as he covers all the antique empires called universal. And if we want to understand the different heads, we must probably go back to the Chaldean Empire in Babylon. Let's try to examine something else before proceeding. We have seen that these 7 kings are successive. In particular, the 6th one attracts attention. 5 have fallen, then there is 1 that exists, and the 7th has not come yet. Now, if we consider that these heads have the same value as the animals, then the lion would be the first head, the bear the second, the leopard 3 heads, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and the monster 7. This does not work out well, as the 3, 4, 5, 6 ones are concomitant. The 4 kingdoms following Alexander the Great existed together at the same time. I therefore suggest something else, a different approach. If they have been together, then we'll consider them as one, the third head. As for the monster, the Roman Empire, this monster exists since the beginning of the empire and will keep on until the end. And we do understand that its story is complex. It is a fact that the Roman Empire keeps on existing through the feudal system of the Middle Ages, with the Roman Church to which are subordinated all the European courts. Then there is also the mortal wound, the third period, the time where Rome does not occupy the first place. It is a kind of support. She is just there without intervening. Then comes the fourth period, when she comes back to the forefront of the scene. This, therefore, is the fourth lacking period. So, taking this into account, it can be said that the Babylonian Empire is the first head, Medo-Persian Empire the second head, the Greeks being the third, and the fourth animal corresponds to the 4 phases of the Roman Empire and to those which have succeeded this empire. Here are, therefore, the 4 phases of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire itself, the Roman Church with its Middle Age system, the system in the background not at the forefront, then it's coming up again in the forefront for a short time period. We then come to this chart, which shows clearly that Babylon is the first empire, Medo-Persia the second, Greek Empire the third, the feudal system, Roman Empire the fourth, the feudal system the fifth. Then it is said in Revelation 17:10, 5 have fallen. Effectively, the feudal system of the Middle Ages fell with the French Revolution. 5 have fallen. One is that which exists at the time of the prophecies Babylon, that is this world system. But it is not yet in place. It is being put in place. We are told the seventh has not yet come and he must continue a short time. And it is certainly a matter of days, at most a few weeks. It can be just added that the 8th king is the beast himself. Then, before getting to the 8th king, there is another wording I'd like to show you. We are told in verse 11, he was, the beast was, but it is in the past. It existed up to the 5th. He is not. He is no longer at the forefront, because it is Babylon, it is the woman who is at the forefront. And then he reappears. He will reappear in the 4th of the 7th and will ascend out of the bottomless pit. The text adds, there is an 8th king. And please note that there is not an 8th head, but an 8th king. So, if the heads are masks, behind which Satan has been hiding himself, now there is no mask available, no mask anymore. 2 possibilities. Either he is hiding behind a mask that once existed, this is what some think, or there is no mask at all, and he presents himself just as he is. He may come disguised, most certainly, as we know that he can disguise himself as an angel of light. It is not in the form of a forked devil that he will show up. Certainly not. Quite to the contrary, he will come up in a very attractive way. But when he has laid down all his cards, he will be compelled to present himself as he really is. So when it is said the beast himself is an eighth king, couldn't we understand that the beast himself is none other than Satan? That is to say, that our history would end with an apotheosis of Satan when his system par excellence, Babylon, is fallen, a seventh king appears, but lasts at a short time. And he would probably present himself once again as the savior of the world. Here's how we can imagine these 7 heads and these 8 kings. At that time, the elected are safe, because Babylon is fallen, and all his illusions have not deceived them. Unfortunately, these illusions are still seducing the world, and they are there, still ready to embark the world in new beliefs, new hopes, but in the midst of an unmeasurable distress. How good it is at that moment to be on God's people's side. Certainly, the people has been persecuted, gone through difficult times, but the most difficult times in the end of our history are for those who have not followed Jesus. So, we still have the choice. As long as we have a tiny choice, let's use it. Jesus presents himself as the one who does not quench the smoking flax. As long as there is a little bit of heat in the candle, it is the time to start the fire again. If ever the fire within us has been extinguished, don't we want him revive the flame? If there is only a small flame or some heat, please do allow Jesus rekindle this flame.